But in those days, of course, the distinctions were not that strong. Okay, so when he was in Argentina, okay, before the coral reef part, he spent a lot of time, as I say, on these coastal areas, and people showed him fossils. He collected some. And, of course, local people would find fossil vertebrates. They're always really neat, just like people come into my office and they think they have a dinosaur's vertebral column, and it's really a nautiloid, and well, that's okay. It's better than a dinosaur. I don't like dinosaurs. This is way better. Well, Darwin found all these relatively young vertebrates. When I put the slide together, I had all the names, but then I can't pronounce them. So some of these were fossil anteaters, camels, tapirs, armadillos, sloths, and even something that looked like an elephant. Okay, it looked like it belonged to the elephant group. And he was absolutely struck by the size of these things. They were huge. Well, maybe not the elephant, but they were huge by comparison with the modern ones that he knew about and that he had seen. Now, of course, he didn't really know that much about what he was looking at until he got home, and then he showed these bones to different people. He sent them to other experts, like Richard Owen, for example, and they said, oh yeah, that's got to be a fossil tapir. But it was so much larger. So in his book, he says, the Pampas of Argentina. I just love this. Darwin was a very good writer, you know. Another amazing thing for somebody in their 20s. You can't get people to write their way out of a paper bag nowadays. That's not totally true, but the Pampas, one wide sepulcher of these extinct gigantic quadrupeds. Like, he was completely knocked out by this, totally extinct. The Pampas swarmed with great monsters at some point in the past, but not very far in the past, because he knew from the shells that it was pretty young. And unusual for the time, he said, it must have had a different climate. Okay? People didn't think like that in those days. They didn't think of ecology the way we do now. It must have been different. Might not have been luxuriant like a jungle, but it was certainly different. And it wasn't wretchedly sterile. I love that. Wretchedly, that's what a university administration is saying. You walk in there, that is sterile. I'm just joking. But the Pampas, for him, were wretchedly sterile. This is before the wine industry got going in Mendoza. That's how you could survive there. There were a lot of Welsh people down there. I don't know if that means anything to you, but wretchedly sterile like the modern one. Okay, he was completely struck by this. So, but he also was so well read. For a guy in his 20s, remarkably well read, even though he did poorly at school. I don't think they had exams, but he didn't, it wasn't very good for him. He obviously absorbed it, okay, because he already knew that the extinctions of those giant beasts was coextensive or co-occurred all over the world at that time, okay? Basically, in this case, just hundreds of thousands of years ago. Okay, well, and they couldn't have been due to temperature. Okay? It's not like global climate change, the way you're indoctrinated now. It has to be other reasons, and he wasn't sure what they were. Why would these things go extinct in the Arctic, still cold, and also go extinct in the tropics, still hot? And he also was impressed by, even though there were changes in the geology along the coast, they were slow, okay, and gradual. These could not explain the abrupt extinctions. Okay, Darwin again was one of the first people to put an ecological explanation about these grand extinctions. They knew about them before, but they didn't know. Cuvier had known about them, but they didn't understand why. And he even postulated, was man responsible for these events? Okay, were human beings responsible? And that idea has come up many times since then. All right, so this is 1839. The book is published. What does Darwin do? Okay. Well, Darwin, as you remember from last year, he kind of receded into obscurity in terms of his personal, how much time he spends at conferences and meetings and so on. He became a kind of a recluse. And he had many visitors, of course, Lyell and others, and he did travel, but he wasn't he wasn't promoting himself. He was just quietly working away, and he kind of shunned the limelight. So the first 2 books that he was involved in, he basically edited a series of contributions by colleagues like who described the bones that he had collected. Okay? He'd sent his collections all around, including the birds and so forth. And then he finished his book on the coral reefs, okay, the one that I just told you about. Then he wrote a book about volcanic islands. Okay? And again, that was something that he developed from the Pacific and the Indian Ocean on their way home. And then he wrote a book on the geology of South America as it was known then. Then he wrote 2 amazing books on barnacles. And you would say to yourself, why on earth would you study barnacles? They're the damnedest things, you know. I mean, you scrape them off your ship, you know, you buy some, they're the things you cut your hand on when you're trying to shuck an oyster, unless you stab yourself with the shucker, which is what I did last night, bleeding here profusely. They're the most boring possible organism to study, frankly. And if you eat one of these in northern Spain, if it's been lying out in the bar for a little longer, you get sick. I'll tell you that for experience. These are called percebes in Spain, and they're a delicacy. Eat the barnacle. So what he did essentially was expanded his geological expertise by writing all his stuff up, his years of observation on the Beagle, and then he decided to pick up 2 groups. Now he had found fossils of these things before. Okay, the barnacle is a little. It's really like a little crustacean, but it's a really weird crustacean. Some of them, as you know, live in a little kind of cone like this, and others just live stuck to the rocks, like the percebes ones. And he basically, this is where I think that Darwin sharpened his taxonomic tools, like how to describe, how to name, how to relate different species to each other. And barnacle workers, and I don't know any of them in any people who work on fossil barnacles at all in the world. I've just never heard of anybody. You really have a hard time finding papers on this subject. But these books that he wrote are still the main books on barnacles. It's amazing. They're still amazing. Now, his last barnacle book came out just in about 1858. Okay? And so then he was already planning to write the great book we know on the origin of species. And you know the story that Wallace sent him, Alfred Russel Wallace sent him his little article, and Darwin was, oh my God, I'm going to get scooped, OMG, twittered away to all his friends. Lyle said, pull yourself together, Matthew. Write the book now. Write a short one. So he said, okay, and he wrote the short one, okay, on the origin of species. And this had been gestating in his mind for years, of course, and he'd been filling in his experience as a scientist. And of course, he first thought he was going to use this as the frontispiece. It's a joke. This is the famous art picture by, what's his name? The great Doré, the great engraver. There's the dove, and all these people, oh my God, and everybody's, waters are receded. And Lyle said, no, you can't put that in as your frontispiece. No, they didn't do that. I don't think there is a frontispiece to the origin of species.